I'm going to clean the grass and dirt out of here. There would be some dust from the clutch plates, and that contains asbestos, so don't blow it out or you'll end up breathing it in. I'm just using a old art trowel. I've got a bucket to drop it into. You could use a paint scraper or screwdriver. A lot of this stuff is because the plate under here was missing. It was already missing when I bought it. Make sure you clear up down the back where the split pin or cotter pin is, where the drainer hole is. There's a drainer hole there. You don't need this filling up with any leaks or anything. You'll end up with it filling up with oil and then your clutch won't work. This is the side where the clutch plate goes. So a lot of this is build up from the clutch plates. Take it nice and easy. You don't want to stir this stuff up too much. A bit of a wipe down around the joint. I wasn't sure how far I'd be able to drive it, so I didn't wash it before bringing it in. And just give it a wipe down on this side. These are the old parts. That's the old thrust bearing carrier and the old seized thrust bearing. The main clutch plate, almost worn down to the rivets, but only on one side. The other side's not too bad, but still worn down. There's the old pilot bearing from the flywheel. That's the old clutch assembly. Still got the PTO clutch inside. And these are the new ones. That's the thrust bearing carrier. And all this is the clutch kit. So in the clutch kit, here's a new clutch plate. It's instructions. It's the 11-inch dual clutch. Flywheel pilot bearing. The wood seems to have pushed the casing there a little bit. Feels like it's only just catching on it though. I was hoping the wood was going to stop that from happening. Because this bearing got damaged and is catching just a little bit, I don't want it to heat up and seize, so I'll change it. That's what that piece of wood did. Here's another new bearing. Now that's sitting flush. I'm going to use a 30mm socket just to get that little bit extra in, so it sits in the recess. And that socket sits on the edge, on the outer edge, and doesn't give that damage that the wood gave. I'm going to put the thrust bearing onto the thrust bearing carrier. Flat side goes against the clutch. You want it to go on that way. So at the moment the bearing's sitting flush with the bearing carrier. It needs to go a little bit further than flush. So you can see that. See how it protrudes just a little bit. Making sure that there's no dirt sitting on top of that. I'm going to put some grease on it. Some grease on either side. There is a groove in there. Put a majority of the grease into that groove. slide that back into position. Get the pliers. Hook the spring on. Get the spring on the other side. Just lift the clutch pedal up. Makes it a little bit easier. And put the spring on. Now, when you push the clutch pedal. So here's the new clutch plate. It can only go on one way. It goes on that way. If you try and put it on the wrong way, it obviously won't go in. So it goes in that way. This is a clutch aligning tool. Sits in the pilot bearing. Just like that. So now the PTO clutch slides over the top of this. Now the instructions for this new clutch assembly says not to use these. I've got new bolts with new spring washers. I'm holding it up with my knee. I didn't want the weight to sit on this clutch aligning tool. It is only plastic. So the new bolts I got are a 5/16 by 1.5 inches long, and they're a UNC thread because I didn't want to risk snapping the old ones. I don't know what they've been through, if they've been stretched or anything, so I thought it'd be better just to get new ones. There's 6 of them. This is a 1/2 inch socket. The only torque I could find for these is 22 foot-pound, so that's what I'm going to go with. Trying to do it evenly. Check them all. This is where we take out the shipping bolts, the 3 bolts that keep the tension on them springs. These shipping bolts seem to be a 10mm. So make sure you undo these, otherwise you'll end up with a slipping clutch. So that's the 3 of them. Take the clutch aligning tool out now. The PTO adjustment is just here. Time to put it back together. There it goes. This bolt here wouldn't come out because of the exhaust pipe. I haven't found anything what these are supposed to be, the torque settings that these are supposed to be at. And there's one goes in up here. Just a short bolt. I'm going to put the oil pressure line back on. It doesn't have to be very tight. It is only brass. It will strip if you try and do it too tight. Now for this top one, which is just in here, there's a bolt and a nut with a spring washer on this side. I'm going to put a spanner on one side, try and get the socket on this side. This piece here is held on by 2 bolts. And they go in to the back of that. 2 of these on each side. This plate here holds the throttle control. This one goes on there. This is the cable for the revs gauge, hour meter that's normally up on the dash. This one doesn't actually have one, I don't know if it used to have one and someone's taken it off and put in a plate where it used to be. But I'll just put that into place just to stop the dirt getting in there until I get one. I'll put this bolt in here. Throttle control linkage. Now the voltage regulator sits up in there. There's a hole on the other side. There's 2 bolts that are rubber mounted and they're attached to it. So you've got to get the bolt through the hole on the other side and then bring this bolt up and around that part, either front, back, doesn't really matter. Get it into the top of the slit and pull it down. So that has a washer, spring washer and a nut. Remember that is rubber mounted. So if you go too tight, you'll break the rubber mount. This is the other side. Voltage regulators there, the washer, spring washer and the nut. It is a rubber mount, don't do it too tight. Just going to put the steering arm on. Straighten this back out. Don't need these bits of wood anymore. Going to put the wires on the generator. The battery is disconnected while I'm doing this. You should have battery disconnected anytime you're doing anything around anything electrical. Yellow with green stripe goes on the outside of the generator. And the yellow one goes on the back like that. Because I had to cut this wire, I couldn't undo it from there, so I just cut it. I'm going to put a plug on it and reconnect that. So I've just got a tool like that. There's the wire. Plug I'll be using on this side. Just squash that on there. And that's what I'll be doing on this side. Another squash. Push it together. It's the wire for the headlights. I'll sort the headlight wire out when I get the grill on. Going to be putting the starter motor back in. Put these wires back up through there. Sits in there. Bolt that goes through there with the earth wire from there. And the one from the battery goes on there as well. Spring washer and a nut. Now the other bolts, one goes in there and one goes at the back top. One bolt goes in there, the other bolt goes in from behind. A bit awkward to get in, so I'll use long extension. That one is the earth wire to the battery. The battery is still disconnected, and the one underneath that is the one that comes around the back, and it's a starter motor's earth wire. Yellow and red wire goes onto the little tag. The brown wire goes onto the big tag on the top. Nut on the back here. That one is a positive battery terminal, which is usually marked by being red or with a plus. Now anything to do with the positive, you definitely want to have the battery disconnected. That thread's only brass as well, so be careful not to tighten that too much. I have put the camera up inside the bell housing so we can see the operation of the clutch. That's what it looks like through the inspection hole from underneath. I'm going to take it off the stands. I'm going to put the grill back on. I need to line this hose up into there because the air box is in here. And the bolts go in there. Just going to reconnect the headlight wires. They're plugged in. The bottom part uses the same bolts that hold either side down the bottom. That goes behind there and behind on the other side as well. On top of the two plates on either side, underneath the plate at the front. Now along inside here, there was a couple of these 8mm tech screws. Now I'm going to put the battery in. Now with the battery leads, the negative goes to the body of the tractor. The positive goes to the starter motor. The positive is red with a plus, negative is black with a minus. So this one's positive, comes from the starter motor, which is marked with a plus on the battery. I'm going to pull the stop engine lever just in case when I put the negative on it turns over, making sure it's in neutral. Okay, it's fine. I don't have the negative terminal on yet. I want to tighten down the positive terminal first, because while I'm tightening that, if I touch the body of the tractor, I don't want it to have a short circuit or arc or anything like that. Put that around that way, because when the bonnet's on, it sits down over the positive terminal, and if that hits the side of the metal from the bonnet or the side cover or anything like that, it could cause a fire. Nobody wants that. This one, I've got a isolator terminal on it. That way, just by loosening that, it gives the same effect as disconnecting the terminal. It's also good if you're going to leave your tractor for a long time. If anyone bumps the lights, or if you've got children and they have a habit of turning the lights on and leaving them on. Okay, now I have not adjusted the clutch at all. It's in neutral and the stop engine is pulled. Okay, no funny noises. Just put it in the first. Okay, it's not creeping forward. I just wanted to make sure of that before I start it properly, put it in gear and shoot off through the shed. Don't need that happening. Now I'll start it. Go in gear. Out there, where the